Thanks and welcome. I think Mark set a fantastic strategic framework for this discussion. Nice follow-on to the earlier discussions. I also don't come from a technical background, and in fact, this is my first MEF meeting ever. As was just said, headed corporate strategy at Comcast prior to becoming the CFO of Comcast Business, and since August, head product. And so, being new to this group, I figured it would be helpful, perhaps to you and absolutely to me, to just take a step back and talk to customers, to really understand a little bit more about how our end user enterprises are experiencing SD-WAN. How have the deployments gone? How's it running? What would you like? And I thought that would be a good lead-in and perhaps a good background for me for this discussion. So, you know, as you look at what the key intended benefits of SD-WAN are, when you hear the pitches from the vendors, you hear our pitches, you know, first and foremost, QoS and network segmentation. SD-WAN promises to create, as we're all probably familiar with in Los Angeles, HOV lanes, network segmentation. We don't want our employees who are watching Netflix to interact with or conflict with important executive video conferences, and we want things like network failover. Second, centralized visibility and management. You know, a single pane of glass. SD-WAN promises a single pane of glass and visibility across the entire network enterprise-wide. Third, security. You know, security is fast becoming one of the most, if not one of the top two most important network attributes. And increasingly, as anyone who runs a network, security is by far the biggest focus, perhaps beyond bandwidth these days. And then finally, cost savings. You know, budgets are flat. The promise is we need more bandwidth, we need more reach of our networks, and so we've got to do something to generate cost savings and moving off legacy networks or really doing more with the same or with less. And so that's the pitch of SD-WAN, that's the promise. As we've talked to customers, you know, what we hear them tell us is, you know, really the two most important aspects of SD-WAN adoption, why they adopt SD-WAN, are the first two, QoS and network segmentation and centralized visibility and management, more so probably than security and cost of service, which I'll get to. QoS and network segmentation is fundamentally the problem that customers are trying to solve with SD-WAN. They need more bandwidth, they need to optimize traffic, and they need to reflect the fact that all traffic is not created equal. You know, secondly, centralized visibility and management. And here, it's in large part a labor challenge. There's a shortage of skilled labor increasingly as we manage nationwide or global networks. There's not the skills on the edge, on the endpoints of the network, and so more needs to be done centrally. And of course, as the network becomes more important, the priority of responding faster is even greater. Security, I would have thought, in fact, we adopted the Versa platform, and when I looked at how Versa describes itself, it describes itself as an SD-WAN and security company. And for many SD-WAN platforms, the promise is it brings SD-WAN and security together. When we talked to customers, customers said, yeah, no, I kind of get it, but look, I've got a pretty good legacy security platform. Let me solve the SD-WAN problem first. I can live with my legacy security operations or platform, and then perhaps over time, I'll bring those two together. And so this was seen more as a future-looking opportunity as opposed to a current direct need. But for sure, it was on the roadmap as something going forward. And then finally, in terms of cost savings, what we heard from customers is, look, at the end of the day, our budgets didn't really go down as a result, but we were able to do more. And so cost savings from a customer's perspective is a requirement, but really not the reason they adopt SD-WAN. It almost becomes a way to adopt SD-WAN in terms of cost savings allows companies to move off the legacy networks. So when we asked, how did the deployments go? 6.5, not bad, actually. In some ways, in moving such a large network from legacy up to the current state, almost this is a pretty good grade, maybe a B, maybe a B minus. But I think a lot of companies expected it to be harder, and probably we expected to hear from companies that it was a little bit harder. And so when you asked what made it a success, first, network inventory. A lot of companies just don't really know what's on the LAN, let alone the wide area network. And so understanding everything that's connected to the LAN before making the transition is critical. Golden config, getting the site configuration set up, locked down, tested prior to rollout is critical. And then leading into the third point, really there's always an urgency to move faster. In this case, what we heard from customers who were most successful is they went really slow and really methodical in the beginning before they went fast. And then finally, having an operating model. As we talked about in the last slide, there's really an opportunity to have centralized management, to move things from the edge to the center, to think about roles and responsibilities. And as customers have moved through, as enterprises have moved through this transition, understanding how they were going to operate it was critical. And those things led to the most successful outcomes. In terms of challenges, vendor assessment. And when one of our enterprise CIOs said, look, it's like Baskin-Robbins. There are 31 flavors of SD-WAN. In fact, I think there are about 80 flavors at last count of different platform providers. And just the selection of which platform provider to go with is a challenge. Support. The current IT staff, not surprisingly, has typically never done an SD-WAN implementation. And so getting outside expertise and getting service provider assistance and platform assistance to make those transitions go well is critical. Connectivity, I think the long pole in the tent oftentimes was, as you can move off legacy networks, just getting more fiber, more connectivity to the edges, that oftentimes was the hardest problem to solve in terms of deployments. And then finally, as we think about network segmentation and QoS, voice traffic seemed to be a struggle in more than one case. As you move all the traffic to SD-WAN and run the voice over it, some customers struggled with voice QoS in the transition. So once these platforms have been deployed, turning to operations, how's it been going? About 8.5. Almost everyone we talked to was pleased in terms of how it's gone, the benefits they're getting from it, the decision they made to move forward. So, at least an A- in this respect. Where were customers positively surprised? Analytics and reporting. The ability to draw more information and more data off the network was something they didn't have access to in the past and found very helpful. Bandwidth. More is always better. I think customers feel the ease and the constraint lifted as they were able to increase the capacity of the underlay, with these new SD-WAN overlays. And then proof of concepts. The fact that they did the proof of concept, they proved it out, and so in some respects weren't surprised about what they didn't get, but were more surprised by once they've had the whole enterprise running on SD-WAN. It generally worked very, very well. How could it be improved? Troubleshooting ops and tools. When something goes wrong, customers struggle and have struggled a bit on terms of how do I really understand what's going wrong? Is it the application? Is it the network? Is it the connectivity? Is it the interface? How do I get better troubleshooting and tools to help me fix things when they go down? Digital experience. Customers love having the ability to fine-tune networks, the granularity. On the other hand, what we heard more was, please make it some more simple for me. It's great that I've got all this control, but I really want more automation and more simplicity. And then the transition from legacy networks, customers like the fact that it was a transition, that you can put SD-WAN on top of MPLS. But as customers get into these networks, they actually want to move off the legacy network faster, and getting the whole journey done has been perhaps a little more challenging than what they've expected. So what's the wish list? What are the areas for customers who have deployed, who are up and running, that they wish kind of worked better, or they wish came along and they wish they could deploy right now? So first, consistent design guidelines. As they reflected on the deployment, there really is not a standard menu, a standard approach to implement SD-WAN. If there were something that were easy, step-by-step that customers could use and enterprises could use that have never gone through a transition, that would really be helpful, as opposed to what often felt like individual one-off creations of the transformative design. Second, support for IoT and mobile. As customers deploy, replace their legacy WANs and LANs, they're moving from their legacy environments where they were effectively managing sites and a number of set devices that are identifiable on the local area network. As they move forward, whether it's car companies who want to add automobiles to the SD-WAN platform, or whether it's restaurants that want to put sensors on the SD-WAN and tie it directly in, whether it's new 5G applications, there's really a belief that SD-WAN becomes the network operating system for all devices, and all devices are IP connected. And so how do we scale this thing massively, particularly as many of those devices interact with the cloud for instructions? Third, self-reporting and self-healing by the service provider. It's great that customers get notifications that something's going wrong and real-time alerts, but wouldn't it be much better if the alert wasn't that there was a problem, but that something was just fixed, and that it was fixed across the wide area network? Customers, as they face their own operational challenges and labor challenges, they want the network to do more as opposed to them having to intervene. And then finally, we've talked about this, simplify. The power of these systems is fantastic. The thirst is for something that's just more simple. And related back to the last point, it's great that we get all these tickets and it's great that we get all these analytics, but I'd almost really more prefer something that told me everything was working fine and maybe just a smiley face at the end of the day instead of a long report. So those are the 4 areas. As we talked to customers, we heard where should we take SD-WAN as an industry forward? Consistent design guidelines, IoT and mobile device support, self-healing, self-reporting, and simplification. So from my perspective, after having done these discussions with colleagues, what are the key takeaways for MEF? First, from a service provider perspective, we're all challenged. Back to the Baskin-Robbins 31 or 80 flavors, we tend to support a couple flavors or a couple different platforms of SD-WAN. One really deeply, maybe a couple lightly. Our customers oftentimes come to us having made the SD-WAN decision, and our customers come to us with challenges of their own and their IT support and their IT staffing to support those platforms and want our help. And the challenge for us is how do we scale that support across a multiplicity of different platforms? And it's difficult for us as service providers to provide that benefit of scale to customers if treating each of the different SD-WAN providers or platforms is a one-off. So the platform standard and certification programs really get at those issues. It unlocks the deployment and operational challenges and efficiencies. As we think about a common language and this thirst for common design guidelines, efficiency, ease of deploying the systems, really getting a common language around SD-WAN, who does what does what, carrying that across the different providers of platforms enables us to get scale. And then more importantly, it enables us to coordinate these things, as Mark talked about, connecting the left side, the traffic, to the commercial terms. We were talking about this yesterday in some of the meetings. If back to the self-healing, self-reporting, geez, if I was offering something to one of our Comcast customers operating on the PCCW network and a link went down, wouldn't it be great, instead of us getting a ticket and having someone have to call PCCW, that we had the commercial terms in place, a ticket was issued, the PCCW OSS systems flagged it, sent a technician out, SLA was reported on, it was just fixed automatically, and the commercial terms just flew. I think we're far away from that, But in terms of customers wanting simplicity, wanting self-healing, that's wanting consistency across different platforms, that's absolutely going to happen, and that's absolutely part of the MEF vision. And then finally, collaboration with industry groups like ONUG. We need to connect the end customers to the broader service provider ecosystem. I talked about security as something that was on the horizon, but was not yet implemented. Increasingly, as we move forward, the SD-WAN platforms will need to be connected directly to the security platforms, whether that's operated in the cloud as a secure gateway, whether that's operated as a VNF on a UCPE. Getting those connections are critical. We've also heard a lot about the cloud providers. Increasingly, as enterprises run their critical applications in the cloud, need those delivered to the customers with quality of service and network segmentation, really broadening what the MEF does and who the MEF touches in our industry group, to the broader service provider ecosystem and to the broader industry ecosystem is critical. So thank you very much for that. It was certainly helpful for me to reflect back on customers, and I hope that was useful to you as well. And look forward to interacting with you in the future. Thank you.